Finally. Yeah. Can you listen to me?
I can listen to you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, for some reason there's like a thing. What is this? Go away. Okay, there it's gone.
All right, there you go. Okay, finally. Nice. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. You have
That's
this
awesome.
like, beautiful floral assemblage behind you. You have,
Oh
like,
yeah. Well,
and-
we're in Brazil after all.
Right.
Where are you? You said you guys
Um,
were moving out or transitioning to.
No, we go back and forth between since COVID from the city to the country. So and we're never really sure when we're moving, so it sometimes comes up.
Oh, that's okay. That's great. That's great. Well, I have a lot of things to talk to you about. Like, I have a huge list here of things I want to, run by you. But I would like to ask you first, would you like to introduce yourself? I really would like you to do that. How would you introduce yourself? Because you do so many things, but it would nice to have you. It would be nice to have you doing that.
Yeah, I could do that.
Yeah. All right. All right. Please.
I introduced myself recently as a botanist who works at the parrot jungle in Miami, Florida, none of which is true.
That's nice. That sounds nice.
I was writing something about plants. Now I'm a psychoanalyst in New York, a professor at the New School for Social Research, an author of 3 books and numerous articles in, psychoanalytic journals and the New York Review of Books and the New York Times and Artforum.
That's awesome. That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for introducing yourself. Okay. We could have the whole interview just you introducing yourself, right? Yeah, just like listing a couple of things you've done. That's nice. How's the COVID-19 thing there in New York? I would like to start with that.
It's much, I mean, it's really been a miraculous recovery. It was horrible, obviously, and sort of the kind of ground zero for the entire situation here in the US. But like Mayor de Blasio tweeted last week that we're at like a 0.25 transmission rate, which is great. I mean, it's the lowest that it's been.
All right.
And in the city, I have just the feeling that people are very careful, and the city is very strange right now because all the bankers and all the tourists are not there. So it's actually quite nice. It's like the New York that you always wanted.
Yeah, a New York without tourists, right?
Without tourists and without bankers. That's the important.
And without bankers.
They all went to their mansions. So yeah.
All right. Well, fuck them. That's
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right on, right on. And what about the election? I was reading so much about it this week, and I would like to pick your brain on that as well. So now Kamala is part of it, and what do you think about it? Because we have a lot of gloomy sort of perspectives regarding what is gonna happen.
Yeah. I mean, last week I just swing like pretty drastically in my feelings about it. I was pretty dismal about it last week, feeling like he's gonna do everything possible to steal the election, even though it seems like by virtue of the popular vote that he's going to lose. Although no one wants to say that anymore, given what happened the last time.
Sure.
But I was really kind of moved by the Democratic convention, which I'm not normally moved by these things. And I thought Biden did an incredible job. And I think the kind of backstory of Kamala Harris is very important in this moment. She's Southeast Asian and Jamaican and from, raised by a single mother, basically, for most of her life. And her parents met and, working for social justice during the protests in the 60s. Yeah. So it's kind of this amazing story. I guess, watching it, however, the question is going to be whether Americans, I guess, want to identify with stories of suffering. I mean, even Biden's story is a story of losing his wife, losing his daughter, losing his son, overcoming a stutter. I mean, and they're pushing the question of the failure and suffering of the American people. And Trump was the person who, on the one hand, said he's going to make America great again, which means that there's some suffering somewhere, but that's not acknowledged because it's all within this rhetoric of sort of winning. And and the enforcement of whatever order and rights, like bring America back to its rightful owner, kind of a propaganda.
Yeah.
I just don't know. Like, do people want to recognize that they suffer is a very psychoanalytic question, right?
That's true. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of funny because you have this whole, after Trump won, I don't think like, I speak occasionally with a couple of Americans and everything, but I don't think people know the kind of influence that it had on, like other areas of the planet, especially here in Brazil, here in the South America, like there's this whole thing where they call our president the Trump of the jungle, or
Right.
something like that. Yeah. And I think that this whole, far right movement got out of control. But I'm, I don't, different from you guys, we're not really seeing, any light at the end of the horizon. We're not really optimistic about this kinds of stuff. The COVID situation here gets, worse and worse every day. We got like 1,000 deaths every day, and half of the population just denies it. It's just like that's another really interesting psychoanalytical point about it. It's like a bunch of people living in denial, like this is not happening, like this is somehow fake news, and all these little terms that Trump came up with, and now it's like in some, countryside, a village here in Brazil, someone is saying the same thing. It's the power of this thing that really intrigues me, like, because it started with him, and then it just like swept the fucking world. It's just like,
Right.
it's kind of frustrating to think about it, because we don't know how we're.
I mean, it's interesting to say the impact that Trump's having, because I always thought of both Russia and parts of South America as the models for Trump and not vice versa. I mean, like when, I was complaining to Vladimir Safatel about Trump, and he's like, yeah, this is old news for us. This kind of
That's
experience.
Funny. Yeah. Oh, well, I don't know.
But I also, probably he emboldens in a certain way the dictators. I mean, not just by cozying up to them and making it politically viable for them to do what they're going to do, but also just watching
Definitely,
how much he gets away with. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, and here we have this whole thing when you're talking about like dictators in South America, and you have the whole our economy minister, and they have this whole like Chicago Boys economical school that has been somehow advertised as this, this is going to save the country economically. This is going to be the one thing that is going to change our economy and put us back on the map and all that kind of stuff. And now, 2 years in, and nothing has happened. And the economy hasn't, been as bad as it was when it first started. So it's just a little weird, It's kind of funny to think about that and see how these guys had so much influence in Chile. With Pinochet and all those things, and it feels like here everybody will buy whatever they're selling. That's kind of a funny thing. Whatever they're selling, they're just like, okay, I'm in. Is it okay in the U.S.? Is it popular there? We'll do it. So,
right.
Well, now we're kind of thinking that maybe if Trump gets like his ass kicked in November, then there will be a shift. There will be a little change. So we're rooting for that as well. In a way, yeah. So,
well, I'm rooting for it. Also, because if he wins, then I might have to leave the country.
yeah, well, you gotta know your enemies, right?
Right.
Yeah, definitely. What about the left? Because like there's this left here. I'll first start talking about a little bit about politics just to warm up. Yeah. The left here is kind of a joke, and yet this is our only way out, right? How do you paint a picture of the left there after Hillary, after everything that happened with the last election, and we had the New York Times saying there's no way this guy's going to win, and then next thing you knew, it's like, okay, he's the president.
Right.
Yeah. How do you?
I think that you can't underestimate the problem that, on the one hand, I think that there were massive symbolic gains with someone like even Clinton to a certain extent, because he wasn't that kind of prototypical white conservative male, and he spoke to a younger generation. So the symbolic nature of Clinton at the moment that he came into power, I remember it as a young girl in the 90s. I mean, I remember him with the saxophone on Arsenio Hall, and it was like, wow.
Wow, that was so
And and then Obama, of course, was, I mean, symbolically huge. But then I think there's also a sense of betrayal beneath that symbolic victory, which is that they ended up playing into corporate capitalism as much as anybody. And that, this was a long process, let's say, in the erosion of the kind of growth of the middle class and growth of things like Social Security since World War II. So you had these symbolic victories that at the same time, actually, there are detrimental real effects being felt, and that are certainly being felt now at this point, which allowed, I think, Trump or someone like Trump to step into power. So one of the things that we always say is that Trump is a symptom of a larger problem in the United States, which is, of course, also why the question of systemic racism is so huge right now. This predates Trump. I mean, Trump just cashed in on it. And it was kind of amazing to see, because there are, real blind spots in our sense of how deeply rooted white supremacy is in the United States. It's a real failure to recognize the suffering of Americans. So the left, I think, is that conundrum. And, they also have a problem, which I was recently kind of speaking with people in politics about, which is that they said that being on the left is like herding cats. You have all different kinds of left. Whereas the right is very consolidated by virtue of the money, the lobbyists, the special interest groups, pharma, oil. Like they can just put that machine into place, get it going, and seize power. Whereas, the left is a mess. It's, maybe you could look at it from one angle that it's a very beautiful mess. It's a very diverse mess, but it's a mess. And, whereas I was upset as anybody else with what they did to Bernie Sanders. I mean, they just pushed him out of frame, even though he obviously had a huge amount of support, especially amongst the younger generation.
Definitely.
I'm, kind of feeling like Biden was the right person, at least for this moment. Because, at least what I saw in the Democratic National Convention was that they were able to throw a huge net, which was kind of impressive. I mean, Biden managed not to alienate anybody. And you can say that that's a problem. It's not a strong position to not alienate anybody. But at this moment, with such extreme alienation, maybe that's kind of necessary. So.
Oh yeah. But you're optimistic. You would say you're optimistic about.
Well, no, this is just this week. It's just this
okay,
week.
that's just this week. Okay.
Really, just this week. Yeah.
Yeah, because of the convention, because of the
because I saw what the whole time approaching this, I thought, what is this going to be? And I think I saw what it was better than I expected. So. And I see people they're pushing back really hard against the attempt to dismantle the post office.
yeah, I've read something about that. Yeah, definitely. So that's his new trick. That's Trump's new, he's gonna try to do something regular. Yeah.
It's amazing. No, I mean he put this guy in charge who fired everyone and started removing mailboxes and mail sorting machines.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, well, he's a comic book villain, right? Yeah.
Comic book villain.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, that's great. What do you say about? Can we get into the psychoanalytical stuff?
Sure.
All right. What do you say? I read a lot about people saying that Freud was not that political, right? That he was not really that interested into it. Like I've read a couple of things about that. Would you agree?
Yes and no. I think that he isn't political to the extent that he wanted to speak really very much at all about like the contemporary politics. You don't see him getting into debates. I mean, even in his letters with his colleagues, this isn't a topic for him. But I do think that his position with respect to politics or respect to government or questions of governing, that he has a very, very particular stance. Which you could say is political, which in one way was to recognize destructive forces and the attempts by nations to bind those destructive forces, which
Definitely.
he said himself in Civilization and Its Discontents that he did not want to judge one any better than the other. There were clearly worse forms and better forms, but it was also just part of a long process of civilization trying to work itself out, in which you hope that Eros wins over the death drive, but you can't really know whether that's going to be the case. And that, I mean, it's very neutral. It's very Freud championing a kind of
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That's such a beautiful ending, isn't it? Yeah, that's such a beautiful way to put it. Oh my God. And there's also, mass psychology. I read a lot of it, and I always think a lot about that one. We had an episode in the podcast about that one, and we were just like trying to explain like how it goes, this whole mass psychology thing. And he was such a genius by, just pinpointing the exact moments in which these things would happen. Even historically, he was being super, modern and advanced, by saying those things, right?
But the question in mass psychology, right, in that essay as to why people would sacrifice their independence, autonomy, life to a leader who doesn't serve their own interests in the end of the day. That if they're looking for protection, even if it's an illusion of protection, they end up voting for someone who's not going to protect them at all. Yeah, and he wants to understand how that happens. How can something this irrational take place? Oh, yeah. And that's a deeply political. I think it's the only political question we should be asking.
That's exactly what I think when I read people saying, well, he was not that much into, I think it was Rodinesco or something like that, Elizabeth Rodinesco, that was saying that he was not really going deep into politics and whatever. Well, by the way, what did you think of her biography of Freud?
Rodinesco?
Yeah.
I didn't read it. I read the one on Lacan, of course, but I didn't read the one. I don't like reading people on Freud. There's like the Peter Gay, there's the new Joel White book. I can't stand when anyone, I don't know, I love Freud so much that I don't want to hear them tell me about him. I can't make people tell me about Lacan because I think it's funny.
It's funny then. All right, that's cool. That's cool. How did you first? Can we go back and I think you're, in terms of generation, you're just like technically kind of like me in terms of being around that kind of stuff in the 90s, right? I mean, that's when you first got in touch with it, yeah?
Yeah, it would have been like towards the middle 90s, yeah.
Well, do you remember that moment? Can I ask you about that? I don't know if you want to talk about it. Well, what was your first contact with Freud? When did you first like, oh, that's a Freud. I'm going to read this.
I have like a million contradictory origin stories, but which I also like that, like you could pick up like many different articles and there's like a different story each time. The one that's coming to mind now is like going to the Barnes and Noble, although I don't think it was Barnes and Noble, it was called something else at the time, but whatever, like in a strip mall in Miami. Right. And getting Otto Kernberg's Severe Personality Disorders. Right. And I didn't really know what it was, but I bought that book and it helped me a lot with my mother. And I look at this book now because Otto Kernberg is unreadable. I also don't like him very much and I think he's annoying, but it's also unreadable. He's a very bad writer. It's really boring. It's like over jargonistic. Everything is very formulaic.
It feels like you have to take a course to read it.
Right. But so how did I read this when I was 14 years old in a mall and like understand it?
In the mall of all places. Yeah, right. Definitely. Yeah. But that was the first one.
That would have been the first, which started an interest in psychology, psychoanalysis. And I went to college early at 16, and one of the first courses that they did with us, which was just kind of like about thinking in general, they gave us Freud, Nietzsche, and Marx. And I mean, that really changed everything for me at that point.
All right. The three of them.
The three of them. And it was very important to me that it was the three of them, I think. I think like if you had Freud, I mean, because I think they are the big thinkers. I mean, they're the ones who want to conceptualize everything. Yeah. Which I think after that moment, you don't have that impulse so much. Everything in a way becomes an academic exercise of breaking off a piece of something to think about. But they were still in that mode of, I'm going to explain the entire world via my paradigm, whether it was Marx using economy, Freud using the unconscious, or Nietzsche using his kind of anti-philosophy. And I needed that. I think I needed someone to kind of give me a way to think about everything at once.
And you went to college super early, right? You went at 16 or something?
I went at 16, yeah.
Oh, that's great. I was reading your origin story. I was reading one of the versions of your origin story, and I read that you went to college at the age of 16. That's crazy.
It was. My son just went on Monday to the same school at 16. So
wow. That's very symbolic. That's nice.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing school, and they treat you with utter respect. I mean, they have this idea that a 16-year-old is capable of doing the kind of thinking that someone in college can do, and so they treat you that way. And I really needed that. I really needed someone to treat me like I was capable of having a thought of my own.
Definitely. But why do you say that? Why do you say you really needed it?
I don't know. I mean, Miami's a particular place that feels very unreflective and filled with jouissance. Okay. My parents, I mean, both of them are very intelligent in their own way, but I think that they valued education, but they didn't really have a way of conceptualizing themselves or their life or what they were doing or what they were doing wrong or why they were doing anything. Mm-hmm. So, that kind of thing that a good liberal arts education does, which it situates, the question of self-interrogation within the broader kind of interrogation of humanity was missing, not just within my family, but within the world in which I grew up. It just
I see.
And it's also, it's begging for psychoanalysis, but that wouldn't come until later, until I could get to a place where there was an analyst.
Yeah.
Eventually.
Yeah. So Freud, Nietzsche, and Marx. That's a nice combination, I would say. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
It's good that I didn't stick with Otto Kernberg.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it would be impossible to understand you now. Yeah, definitely. That's great. What were you like? I'm curious. Like when you were like in the 90s, because we had so many I was there in the 90s. I lived in the US in the 90s, and it was so interesting and it was so amazing. And you had so many interesting things happening at the same time with books and authors and movies. And there was this whole like independent movie makers, breaking through. It was so fucking awesome. And then with the music, right? I mean, the music was just fantastic back in the day. What were you like? I mean, did you like it? Did you consume it? Can you tell me like what was your favorite movie from the 90s?
I mean, I was a goth in Miami, which is very funny. If you think of like Velvet and black lipstick and 100-degree weather, it makes perfect sense. So I was a bit of like a punk goth kid. I mean, which was really just my expression of alienation from the place. And my middle school was a kind of prep school, Catholic school, and it was like blonde girls named Winsey and Maggie and Lindley and I just I tried to fit in, and then I gave up at a certain point because they weren't going to accept me, and then at a certain point I rejected the whole thing. But then I found this amazing subculture, and that was the moment. I mean, MTV was was coming alive, and it was incredibly exciting. It was like there was so much to discover, and you felt like you were discovering it. Unlike now, where everything's just kind of there on the internet, you really felt like you were getting your kind of hands on something.
I got it. Yeah. So you were a goth. So you were like into goth music, I would say. We would listen like, the Sisters of Mercy in Miami in the 90s or something like that, or I don't know.
Yeah. No, we were listening to like the Sisters of Mercy. We were listening to the Smiths. I mean, there's like a kind of 80s vibe that, kind of throwback from the 90s to the 80s at that moment. Yeah. 9 Inch Nails was also becoming popular. Marilyn Manson was from Florida. So there was like that in the current situation. So there was that kind of current.
Yeah.
And this was a transition out of grunge. I mean, like I was also very interested in like Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and all of that.
Yeah.
Kind of right before then. So.
Yeah, the other day I was thinking about Kurt. I don't know why I keep thinking about, I have this obsession with this young people that, they die and then they don't have the chance to disappoint me. Like I would say, like I was into Kurt Cobain and then into River Phoenix, and then, I was into Rimbaud, the poet, right? And they were all really, like young, crazy geniuses who died young and everything. And I was, I'm always thinking about these things, just for kicks. I like to think about it sometimes. And I was thinking about Kurt, and I was thinking about his suicide letter, in which he says that, just like Hamlet, he must choose between, life and death. Yeah, and it was just, I was thinking about that. I was thinking that when I was like in the early '90s, when I was getting to know a little bit about literature and everything, it was all about reading that book, reading Hamlet and Faulkner and all those things. They were really a really interesting preparation to get into Freud, and then reading interpretation of dreams and all those things. But it felt a little different in the '90s. I don't know. Now when I talk to people that are studying psychology or psychoanalysis, it just feels like, it's much more into, I don't know how to say that, but it's just like much more calculated, I would say, like it's not that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like a professional interest. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No. It felt, which was nice about that moment was all of this felt incredibly existentially like vital. You weren't interested in these things because you had the idea that you could one day be it. We're interested in it because you couldn't live without it.
Exactly. You needed it.
You how to be a person. And I mean, this is the difference, I think, with millennials, is that they're already programming their careers from, the moment that they're in high school. I never thought about a career. I thought I'd figure it out.
I don't think anybody who watched like Slackers was thinking about a career, right? Yeah. Right. That was a different generation. It was totally different. It was like a crazy concept that you're going to think about everything. And I talked to everybody. I talked to my kids, and sometimes we're having these conversations, and it's just so insane, like, what am I going to be? We have to think about that. And, it's just like, what? For us, it was totally different, right? It was all accidental, and it was kind of beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, I was really invested in being angry and upset and sad with, you could spend a lot of time in this, investment with it.
Oh yeah. Like the first memories of music that you could play or sing, at least for me, was like Joy Division. It was like just super sad kind of, music that was like, oh, that was kind of a lullaby.
Another person whose life was cut short that can't disappoint you.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Yeah.
I have my list of writers. I mean, obviously there's people like Sylvia Plath, but there's Ingeborg Bachmann, Paul Celan. There's like a whole bunch of poets that died young. Yeah, I keep track of.
Yeah. The other day I was writing something about Freud and Rimbaud, because I was trying to make a point about where were they in Europe at the time, when Rimbaud was just going crazy in the, with Verlaine in Paris, Freud was 15, right? So that was like, I was trying to find it like geographically where they were and historically what was happening at that time, And I got some letters that Freud was writing at the time and this kinds of stuff. And it was interesting to see how they were somehow, in some way, technically talking about the same thing, because I think I don't know about you, but for me it was so interesting when I read that the clairvoyant letter that Rimbaud wrote to his teacher, and then he says like the self is another person, like that's the first sentence in that thing, the self is another one, you have another one inside of you. And then right after that, when I started reading Freud, I was just like, oh my God, this is what he was talking about. So I made that little connection.
Right.
So that was it was so interesting to see these things happening. It was just so beautiful at the time. It really felt like you were discovering something. And you have all the music and you had all these things. So it felt like, oh, this is all coming together. It was interesting back then. Yeah. And also the writers from the 90s, like David Foster Wallace and all those guys, it was so interesting. Another person to be put in the list.
That's right. Yeah.
That's another one right there. Yeah. Did you read all those guys? Did you like it? Did you like all those Jonathans? Jonathan Lethem, Jonathan Safran Foer.
Yeah, Jonathan Franzen.
Yeah.
They're all in Brooklyn now, right? I mean, not David Foster Wallace, obviously, but no, I actually was not a huge. I didn't read any contemporary fiction. I mean, I really there was, except for Toni Morrison, who was actually really important to me. I mean, I had a teacher who gave me Beloved in high school before I went to college, and it was the first time I read a book that I felt like, oh, this is a book. And there's something important because it wasn't a kind of start to finish, very conservative narrative. Like a beginning, middle, and end of a story. Like Beloved's wild. I mean, it's this chopped up kind of
just all jumbled. Yeah.
And I think that that's the only thing that I could understand because that was my internal experience at the time. So to have a novel give that back to me, but also, within the context of trauma and the problems with America and the history of America, felt right to me. And so I was always disappointed with these guys.
I can see why. Yeah.
for being a little rhetorically conservative at the end of the day. Their ideas might be wild and they might be kind of bred in this
but when push comes to
atmosphere. When push comes to shove, they're incredibly conservative. So
I know. No.
But I went back. I mean, I went back and did a lot of post-war German literature, and then did Flaubert and Proust. I spent a lot of time. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And that was so important. I suppose that was really important, right?
For me, it was really important. Yeah.
Yeah, I always talk about that with my friends, students, and family. We're always having these conversations about books, and I don't know. After I read, I don't know, because I was a huge Faulkner fan. I really liked it. The Sound of the Fury. It was just I don't know. And then I kind of try to convince myself to read, this contemporary, novelists and just, like them for some reason. And then as I grew older, I realized I don't really like them. I'm just, it feels a little strange because, it almost kills your, I think I spent 10 years without reading anything. Fiction, it was all nonfiction in a way,
Right. It's true. It's true. I lost my habit for, and then, if you're reading the big books, you have to just get lost in this world, even if it's Melville or something. And I lost recently my capacity to do that. I also blame the phone, but.
I think I think maybe the phone is something too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I read Ulysses, and it was not my favorite book. Of course, it's not my favorite book or anything, but it was really interesting and really wild at the time I was reading because I was living a very strange life at the time. But I don't know. Now, if I try to read, I read I don't know, 20 pages of a novel now, and I'm just bored. It's just, I don't know. There's something in there that is it feels really phony. It feels like somebody's trying to, put me to sleep,
right.
Literally. Yeah.
Well, I read Ingeborg Bachmann's short stories, ones that were published posthumously. It's the last thing of hers that I hadn't read. And I forgot how hard reading novels can be. I mean, it started to make me feel sick in this very special way that only she can make me feel sick, because she speaks to the kind of claustrophobia and sadomasochistic violence of heterosexual relationships, in which she wants to kind of transmit the atmosphere of the Holocaust into the kind of private domestic space.
Yeah.
And I mean, after I read it, everything my partner says, I think that he's fascistically assaulting me, and I feel confused. No, I mean, really. And then I was I can't read this. He's completely histrionic. So I mean, there's something. I mean, even when we're talking about the 90s, this space where you could just live in these books without the question of the efficiency of your life or the things that need to get done or your professional activities. I mean, I think you could give yourself to a novel that's gonna fuck you up.
Definitely, yeah. So you better, like stop reading that. So, yeah, just leave it aside. Leave it aside. Yeah. I don't know. Okay. What about? Okay, let's go back to the psychoanalytical, conversation. I really want to know, what is your favorite case study from Freud? What's your favorite? Like, what do you have a favorite, or you don't like those either? I don't know.
No, I mean, I love Freud writing about Dora. I don't know that I love Dora.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how can you not love Dora? But I love like the way that Freud kind of like drags you along in this story of his own demise. But the case I love is Little Hans.
Little Hans.
I
Okay.
really love Little Hans. I actually just wrote, I was writing about it, and I love reading it. I mean, I think, it's also a very funny story because Freud's not the analyst, and you've got this father trying to give Freud's message. And I mean, I see children, so it feels like the madness of a child treatment in which the child is the only one who knows the truth. And all the adults are bewildered and blind and incompetent, and they have their own agendas, against everyone's interests. And little Hans is the only one there, like with his neurosis, trying to tell these adults something about the world that they've imposed upon him. And he's so charming. He's like so lovely.
It's a great story. Yeah. It's a great one. It's a great one. Yeah.
They say like, you can't touch your penis, and he says, well, then I'll touch my butt. And they're like, no, you can't touch your butt either. That's not good. And he goes, well, even if it's bad, it's good because you can write it in a letter to the professor. And it's amazing. And Lacan says about that moment, he says everything that's good about psychoanalysis is in that moment, because the idea is that like there's no morality. The question is that something can be said. And this is also what's good about the treatment itself, is that at least these parents are talking to Freud, to each other. They're, something is moving that otherwise wasn't moving in this case. But they don't get it. Hans gets it.
That's amazing. Like at least it's good for writing the professor, right? Yeah. That's just amazing. That's a great. I should make a T-shirt out of that. That's a great. That's a great line. That's amazing. Yeah. I was for so long. I think one of the first ones I read was The Wolfman. Sergei, and I was really obsessed with his book that this Austrian journalist wrote about him. Like The Wolfman 60 years later. Have you read that? I don't know if you've read that. Yeah. Karen Obholzner, I think that's her name now.
I read recently Catherine Clement's book, The Weary Sons of Freud. I mean, I had read it a long time ago, but I was rereading it, and she goes over the kind of the post-history of the case, where he ends up with Ruth Mack Brunswick and then ends up being paid for by the analytic institution. It's wild.
Yeah, definitely selling his paintings and just like, telling reporters like, I gotta consult a couple of people before I talk to you. Just give me a couple of weeks, Yeah, that was just amazing. Yeah, that was just amazing. And I read it again recently for the pod, and then I read it again with this book, this Carrying Upholster book, and it's so good. It's just so good. Like he's such a character. It's just like fascinating. But it's specifically because it doesn't work. I think that's the thing, because I know a lot of analysts and a lot of people in the community, they kind of debunk that one. They say that's a terrible book. This is like destroying the whole legacy of Freud and everything. And I see it completely differently. I just see that's amazing. Yeah, it's just great that it didn't work. That's just amazing. Yeah, let's just hear from this guy now. What's going on? And you can listen to this guy talking at the age of 90 or something. And you can see that he's still damaged, and he's still making like really erratic comments about, weird shit. And you're like, oh my God, this guy, man, it's just, it's just the same as he was sitting there on the couch, and you read from Freud's books and the accounts. So fascinating. Yeah, that's great. That's a great book. That's a great one. Yeah.
I had a dream like last week or something that had a Wolfman. I was going up the stairs and there was like a mechanical butterfly that was moving in like a very strange way. And when I woke up, I thought about the the butterfly wings in the Wolfman case that gave him anxiety and the way that they would be.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's a cool one. Yeah. Yeah. Well, there are so many, right? I like Rat Man. I think that's a great one too. I really like that one too. You know, read a lot about it and thought a lot about it.
It's like he's like, you would like that one because he dies. So we can't be disappointed by how unwell he is.
Exactly. So he died in the First World War, you know, and that's amazing. You know, we would never know what happened. Yeah, if he worked or not, that's just great. That's my kind of patient.
That's your kind of case.
All right, that's great. That's great. Okay, moving on. Do you feel that there's a I don't know there in the U.S. now? Obviously, it's impossible for me to know, even with all the technology. It's something about the feel, so it's difficult to perceive it from here. But here in Brazil, definitely we've been experiencing something of a comeback from Freud. Like everybody's talking about it again. You know, books are being published again. You have like a gajillion fucking YouTube channels about Freud, and everybody's getting into it. And you have a lot of people saying crazy stuff, and you have a lot of academic people fighting those first guys. So I don't know, how does it feel there?
I think it also feels like it's coming back. I mean, I've been able to publish in places that 10, 15, 20 years ago I wouldn't have been able to publish because they were squarely in what they called the Freud wars against Freud. Probably most importantly, the New York Review of Books, which was run by that guy.
And Frederick Cruz, right? Come on, he wrote most of this.
Frederick Cruz. He was pissed about one of my articles and wrote a letter, but they ignored it.
He wrote you a letter?
He wrote the editor a letter saying,
"Oh my God, Frederick Cruz could go to analysis." Frederick Cruz is highly damaged. I don't know what's going on with him, but what is this personal vendetta? I read that book and I was like, what the fuck?
I think he had an analyst that he hated. He had probably a bad analyst, and the guy sucked, and he hates that guy, and so he spent his transference. He's expending his transference by trying to destroy any positive perspective on psychoanalysis.
Yeah, he's just writing lies. I mean, it's not. He's just blunt. He's trying. It feels ridiculous to read that book. What is the name of the Making of an Illusion? Is that the book?
Yeah. The cocaine one?
Yeah. Oh my God. Jesus.
Origins of Freud, right?
Oh my God. Again with the cocaine talk, right? I can take that shit anymore. It's just come on, give us a break, about the cocaine talk.
Why are people so? I don't who cares? Yeah, he did cocaine, and
you feel like telling people, have you ever done cocaine?
Right.
No, maybe you should. Just give it a shot. See what happens. And then stop bitching about it. Right? It feels so. I don't know. It's weird. It's just weird. Yeah.
I mean, at least his excuse for doing cocaine was he was also investigating it. The rest of us cocaine users don't have any excuse.
There you go. But you want to do party on a Saturday night? The guy was trying to change the world in a way, or at least trying to help his friend, right? Who he eventually killed. But that's not the point. It's just he was trying to do something. Oh my God, that's so boring. I read that article of yours in the New York Review of Books. It's just so good. I want to congratulate you personally on that one.
Oh, thank you.
That is so good.
They've been very kind to me.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I don't. Even though I was reading and thinking, how the hell did they actually let her write? This here. It was still so. What was the? They just came to you and asked you?
No, I mean it's a nice story. It's I had wanted to write this thing on pharma. On psychopharmacology. And then when I was publishing the last book, Conversion Disorder, I thought it might be a nice kind of thing to do in kind of commemoration of the book. It's what's different about psychoanalysis from taking drugs and this question of kind of conversion and the body. So I had this idea of short pieces that were devoted to the category, benzodiazepines, antidepressants, sleeping pills, so on and so forth. Yeah. And I used to write for The Guardian. I wrote an article on Trump in 2016 before he was elected in June. And they wanted me to do a kind of garden variety psychoanalysis, mom, dad, brother, sister, whatever kind of a thing. And I didn't want to do it at the time, I just didn't want to. I wanted to speak to something else, which was what kind of a symptom was he for America? So I wrote that, and they weren't particularly happy with me. They published it anyways, but they were pissed because they wanted this other thing. And they thought it was their moment to trot out their psychoanalyst and like make her do a psychoanalysis of someone. And I said, ethically, I don't actually agree with this. So I sent them this giant thing that I had done on the drugs. And they said, it's too intellectual for us, but let me send it. Yeah, they said, but let me send it to our friend. And so they sent it to the New York Review of Books, and the guy was like, I'm in. So it's really nice. Yeah.
That's just great. Yeah, it's just amazing.
Yeah, that was the editor at The Guardian, Amana Fontanella Khan. She's great. She wasn't happy with my article, but she helped me.
She helped you out somehow. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. That's great. I don't know there, but that's something I'm really curious about as well. It's just what is the like here in Brazil, and I can't say for, of course, I can't speak for South America. I can't even speak for Brazil. I mean, I know a couple of guys, I'm just like, like shooting the breeze here. It's just, it feels like there's this idea of like the psychoanalyst, what he's supposed to look like, what he's supposed to act like, what he's supposed to like dress like. There's this whole thing. Is it like that in the U.S. as well?
Yeah, it is. I mean, certainly when I was in like the most strict classical training, and it was pretty severe. I used to joke with my former professor who went through the same training. She's like, oh, I used to wear my hair in a bun. Like, that's what women were supposed to do. You had to have like the pantsuit on with your hair in a bun and the glasses. You were supposed to make yourself like really drab. And I even was reading an interview with Hannah Siegel at the British Psychoanalytic Society, where she talked about, like how you're not allowed to, she doesn't allow herself to wear any jewelry that stands out. That she and that everyone in the institute knew that this was her theory of how the analyst has to look. So they bought her a very demure pocket watch when she retired from the institute.
That's a great story.
It's kind of amazing. So no, it still is that way. I got in trouble when I was in grad school for the way that I dressed, and like for a while I tried to look like what I was supposed to look like, and I gave up. And I remember an argument I had with this professor where he was saying, like, the students were asking questions like, why do you like, to like, what is this neutral presentation of the analyst? Like, doesn't that actually communicate something in itself? And he was saying that if you are really integrated as a person, and so like if you were flamboyant but it was integrated into you, it'd be okay. But if it displayed your lack of integration, then it would be a problem. I just remember looking at this guy, and then he looked at me because I just hated him for saying, and he looked at me and he goes, like wearing 6-inch high heels, because I used to wear high heels. Okay. And I sort of looked at him like, what, like, do you think it's not integrated into me enough? Or
So how about that, right? Yeah.
Right. He called me a downtown kind of a person. Like he's like, I don't know, maybe if you're a downtown kind of a person, you could wear those shoes. And I realized I got my office is in Soho, which I couldn't have predicted at the time. It's when I first started graduate school, and I was like, oh look, my office is exactly where he said it would be.
After all. Yeah.
After all.
That's fascinating. I don't know, here it looks a little, I don't know, it just feels a little boring, and there's always this competition, which I suppose is pretty common in any area or field or whatever. You always have that. That's a common thing, right? People are competing to know, like, who read more Lacan, or who knows more about this and that, and you always have this kinds of stuff, which I suppose it comes with the territory. Okay, I'll take it. That's okay. That's fine, but it doesn't really translate into authenticity, because at the end of the day, most of these guys, they look like your long lost uncle who was, I don't know, into the real estate business, and it feels phony. It feels like, I don't know, a character in a soap opera that is supposed to play the analyst. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just such a weird thing. I don't mind. I mean, if you that's okay. I'm cool with that. But it's just that not allowing people to be a little different and sort of stigmatizing people because of that, it feels a little weird. Feels a little strange.
But I think it's the professionalization of the field and the institutionalization of analysis. I mean, if you think of what it was in Freud's time, and certainly what was going on for Lacan in the beginning, at least for him, they didn't have this institution. They didn't have the possibility of aligning with medicine or the university. It was just them in their offices. And I mean, Freud allowed for incredible variation amongst his like original colleagues, and the women and the men, and the poets and the people that he saw. He fought with them theoretically, and he didn't like when they verged too much. But as people, I think there was a real acceptance of the diversity of who surrounded him to a certain extent. And then once you start putting this into a formal training, I think that these things get very stultifying. And there's a huge issue, which I was just reading about, which is the question of the selection of candidates. This idea that you have to pre-screen people when they're becoming analysts to make sure they're not psychotic or they're whatever. And analysts know that it's your analysis that's going to make you the person who's going to be an analyst. You can't see that. If you take the person from where they are when they come, on what criteria are you going to base it? You're just going to end up keeping the worst, and you're going to end up getting rid of the best and keeping the worst, because you're going to keep people who you think look like something that you want to call an analyst, as opposed to someone who's gone through an experience and arrives at the place in which they can call themselves a psychoanalyst.
I see, yeah.
So we have real problems as a field, because we're trying to pre-select people rather than allowing this to be a situation where who you are and your desire, like the 90s, brings you to the place where this is eventually what you do. At the same time that we need to train people. We do need to provide them with training. So we haven't figured this out. I mean, I think it's why the field is a mess.
Well, it's no different here. I can tell you that. Yeah, you have a shitload of institutions, and they're, forming people, and everybody's just studying and taking classes and paying money and doing all these things. And then you have the most, these guys from the academia, from really big institutions here, big universities here, and these guys are trying to sort of like this, disqualify. Like, okay, you guys, you're doing it from an independent one. That's not good enough. You got to do it from us. You got to come in here and do it here. So, but my problem with that, my beef with that is the fact that I don't know, when I listen to these guys talking, and when I get to like read what they write, it just feels like so alienating. It's just so alienating. It's just like so crazy. I don't know why we have to make it like so complicated. Like they are trying, that's the idea I have, at least from academia here, is that they're trying to make it as complicated as possible, so that, you're going to have like fewer fellas coming around and trying to do this. You know what I mean? And it's just like, this is so crazy to me, like, because we could really use a lot of psychoanalysts here, This is technically, I know it sounds insane, but it's technically something new here. Like a lot of people don't even know what he means. They don't even know the difference. They're just like, oh, that's the same as a psychologist, or that's the same as So it's strange.
Well, I mean, in the United States, no one has. It's very, very rare that you come across someone who knows the difference between a psychoanalyst and a psychotherapist, or a psychiatrist, or a social worker. I mean, people really don't. There's no place for public education. Unfortunately, if you become a psychoanalyst who's like a public intellectual, you're still speaking to a very, very small crowd. I do more of that than most people, but it's still a very selective audience of people who read the New York Review of Books, or even would like, and maybe once in a while it gets out into other places, or via podcasts, or via, some of these things, it reaches people who don't, who can then hear about the difference. But it's very sad. It is. How we've, we're in this very, very diluted place. So you have this incredible narrowing of psychoanalysis into an academic jargon, You have no public representation, and then you have 500 competitors.
Yeah, why would anyone choose to do that, right? I mean, it feels like it's either a calling or it's like a suicide mission, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just so insane. Yeah, yeah.
It takes one of the things I always bring up is that to be a psychoanalyst takes 30 years of school. I mean, you had to go to undergrad, then I had to go to graduate school, then I had to go to 10 more years of psychoanalytic training. And you could get a master's in counseling in 2 years.
There you go.
And hang up a shingle.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah, that sounds insane, right? That sounds just crazy, right?
Crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, I don't know. It feels weird when I stop to think about it, and when I start reading stuff, I start reading stuff from people that are trying to, I don't know, instead of making it more accessible and more interesting for fellows that are not really familiarized with the idea, I don't know, it feels like they're trying to manufacture some importance based on their, fear of rejection or whatever, just by, projecting all those things into, like gajillion articles no one is going to read because they're trying to, to talk in a language that is like Finnegan's fucking Wake. It's just like, I don't know what's the point of that. I really don't know. It feels a little, counterproductive.
But Freud and Lacan, like if we just take them, but I mean, even if you throw Bion in there, Winnicott were in an amazing position in which they could hold themselves to kind of a rigorous standard of intellectual life. They could force themselves to invent a new discourse and somehow still manage to appeal broadly. You can't do that anymore.
Yeah, that's true.
I play a lot of games where I go this way for this thing and I go this way for another, but it's very hard to imagine inventing a discourse and then also allowing that to go public. And I think I think it's just the time. I think it's Paris 1960, and I think it's whatever, sort of Middle Europe, Freud 1920s.
That's it, right? Yeah. Those were the times. Yeah, definitely. Do you think? Well, one of the interesting things I think about you when I read your stuff and I read about you and everything, it's just that that feels very fresh. The fact that you're trying to do a lot of different stuff that most psychoanalysts wouldn't do. That you're going to do a podcast, or then you're going to, I don't know, be in a public appearance, you're going to read something, and you're going to be doing all these things, it feels really fresh and it feels really interesting for a younger psychoanalyst. Like, oh, that's actually possible, That's interesting. It's kind of interesting to do that. It's kind of interesting to have a dialogue with people in such a close way, that is like, you wouldn't imagine somebody doing that, like that these days. So.
I mean, New York, I have to say, has been a big part of it. I mean, there still is in New York a kind of amazing cultural, like, it's still, New York is still this melting pot of cultures, and you've got the art world, and you've got the fashion world, and you've got, a huge background of sort of so many of the literati are here. Mm-hmm. And it's very like, there's something in New York. It's like once you break through the screen, then you're just then you're like invited to all the.
All right.
And then everything is possible at that point. So I mean, I really figured out how to push something, I think, in a lot of directions, and they love psychoanalysis.
That's
so
right.
It wasn't like, and I very much appreciate the conversations that I've tried to build like within my own field, but I also was interested in what they were interested in me as an analyst, because
I see.
The people, for example, in the art world, psychoanalysis was extremely important to art theorists back in the 60s.
Oh, yeah,
and in their mind, like that's the heyday, and they want to tap into that, and so then they have somebody to do that. So I'm like, let's go, let's figure this out.
Definitely, yeah.
And it was also still so much in the on the TV, it was like Sopranos and Mad Men, and all of this is very New York centric. I mean, obviously Woody Allen, but it was even, sort of post Woody Allen, it was turning up on, on the screen. So
Definitely, yeah. Well, you mentioned Mad Men and The Sopranos now, and it's just so great, right? The Sopranos is like one of what is that? It's the greatest freaking TV show ever. What are you watching now? Do you watch, like you said, you don't read contemporary stuff. You also don't watch, like, what are you in the Brady Bunch?
No, I do. I watch.
Okay, what do you watch? What are you watching now?
I mean, the one thing that I've watched that I found pretty gripping was Normal People.
Okay.
And I had seen Sally Rooney speak, and I was interested in her, but I hadn't read her. I hadn't read her because I don't read contemporary fiction so much.
Okay.
But I did, so I watched it, and then I read her book, and I thought it was a fascinating depiction of méconnaissance in a sexual relationship. Very beautiful. I mean, the intimacy that's possible, but that somehow doesn't necessarily lead you to understand or be able to speak to one another, which, you think of as maybe part of youth and a first love. But actually what's part of that first love is the capacity for intimacy, because it's so new, that you can imagine with all of the misunderstanding that takes place between lovers could add up to a kind of hardening in the relationship between the sexes. And I can't think of another show that depicted this so well in, I don't know, in recent memory. So I was sort of fascinated by that. And I'm also watching Succession for all of its Oedipal themes.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, my wife is into that. Yeah, she's watching that one too. Yeah. That's cool. That's cool. Do you listen to contemporary music? Do you listen to anything like now?
Do I listen to anything? I have this like sort of obsession with men with falsetto voices.
Okay.
I don't know what it is. It's the person who's always looking for the hermaphrodite in me.
Okay, that's a nice
So
explanation.
there's like a kind of James Blake, which continues my like electronic past. I like James Blake a lot. I like this band called Rye from Canada. Every time he's in a relationship, it has to go bad, and then he makes an album. It's the only time he can make an album is when he's
That's
in like
amazing.
in despair, and then you have to wait 7 years for him to start a relationship and then have it go wrong to get another album out of him.
You're kind of rooting for it, right? Yeah.
Like, yes. I'm like,
just go, please, break up. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Fantastic. Those are nice ones. Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. I remember I was listening to a pod. I don't remember if I was listening to a podcast or if I was reading something, like an interview with you or something like that. And you coined a term that I thought it was like interesting, and I was really curious about it. I really wanted to talk to you about that, which is you said something called you kind of said, this is voodoo psychoanalysis. Like when you do voodoo psychoanalysis. Do you remember that? Do you remember that thing? I don't know if you still use it.
I don't remember, but it sounds like something I would say.
It's like voodoo psychoanalysis when you just tell people exactly the whole, like, instead of having them figuring it out by themselves, you just go all the way and you tell them,
Right.
And everything. And I thought that was such an interesting term. I was like really curious about it, if that's of course that's a mistake, that's wrong, you shouldn't do it, right? But that's the point. I don't know if it's a mistake or if it's wrong, you shouldn't do it. That's why I wanted to ask you about it.
Well, I think you can deploy these things. It depends on your tact. I mean, if you act like someone who constantly, has this magical voodoo quality to them, you're going to be in big trouble. But if it's something at a moment in which you do it and can have real impact on the person, I don't think that that's a mistake.
I understand.
Or it's not automatically a mistake. I also talk about tea leaves psychoanalysis, which I like a lot. This kind of thing where they say, like, in the first session, the final session will be present. But you will only know until you're in the final session that all of the elements were there.
Yeah.
Transference, the dissolution of the transference, the fundamental fantasy. And I don't know, I think that that's right. I think it's it has this quality of this omniscient 2020 retrospective capacity that's possible, and maybe that's a problem. But I also think it's right, this idea of the absolute overdetermination of elements. The overdetermination of the unconscious. And doesn't mean that there's not room for contingency, but contingency makes sense as the opposition to the overdetermination of life, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So you're stuck repeating whatever it is that you're repeating, and then there's the amazing moments in which you're freed from that momentarily.
Yeah, yeah, that's the goal, right?
It is the goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's so beautiful. That's nice. That's really cool. That's really, really good. You were also, when we first started the conversation here, said something about, we remember we were talking about Frederick Cruz.
Yeah.
Yeah, that Kuhn. So then you were saying something about probably he had a bad analyst, right? Remember when you said that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. What makes a bad analyst? I mean, the main, like, the skeleton of what is that like?
I mean, I think I worry about the analysts putting themselves in the position of knowledge. You know, where they already think that they know something, and so that you start to feel as a patient as if something's just being imposed upon you, some kind of grid, some kind of system, some kind of prefabricated interpretations. Mm-hmm. And I think that if that's the case, like if there's a kind of prefabricated knowledge that the analyst is using to approach patients, that it's inevitably going to be moralistic and conservative, in which case you're just going to traumatize the patient again in some way. Yeah. With, you know, kind of superego injunctions, and they're not going to find that amazing space that you can find in analysis to worse. I mean, you can have like an overly empathic person who puts all their feelings all over you, and you know, maybe that works for some people. I think that would be fine. The other one would be more of a problem. I mean, no, you got someone who is like super touchy-feely, like maybe you could find some room in that analysis to discover something.
Yeah.
But in the other one, I think I feel like I feel the suffocation of the freedom of analysis.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It feels, I don't know, when you're studying to become an analyst, and you're trying to, you know, you're trying your best to look, you know, to look good and to do the whole thing and to go through the whole thing they want you to go through, and in the middle of it, sometimes you're just like wondering, like, you know, it feels like a very bureaucratic, like, you know, this is just red tape actually that I have to go through just to get all this. But you want to do it because you want to do it properly. But I don't think these things are actually said, you know what I mean? Like, you know, you don't have a lot of people coming around and saying, like, you know what makes a bad analyst? And they're just like making a couple of bullet points, you know? You don't have a lot of that. That's a shame, you know? Yeah. I wish you could have more of that. When you're like, you know, having people studying, you know, these points and thinking about it and all this stuff, you know. And obviously you're going to have the chance to ask, like, maybe if you're lucky, you're going to have, you know, the chance to ask like an experienced analyst, and it's always really super hard to get a straight answer, you know what I mean?
Well, it's really hard. Lacan said it. I mean, it was a real relief to me, because I think my experience was that I was horrified by a lot of what I was seeing in my profession. And then to read him, I remember at one point he says that if a teacher doesn't understand the important place of non-knowledge, then he'll never transmit anything to his students, and he will only ever produce a mediocre psychoanalyst.
I understand. That's so true. Yeah.
And I mean, he's categorical at that moment. And, you know, I even go back to the days where they taught us things like, back to Otto Kernberg, transference-focused psychotherapy, where you had a script.
Yeah.
Script you had like a limited set of interpretations that you had to deliver to the patient.
That's kind of crazy, right?
Wow.
Oh, that's just insane. That's wild. Yeah.
I mean, and in some ways, I can understand. I mean, he's not as bad as like a CBT person, because he thinks dynamically. But the idea was to try to get the analyst to focus on the here and now transference, which is hard for analysts in the beginning. Mm-hmm. They want to make historical interpretations. They don't want to challenge the patient in their immediate relationship to the person of the therapist. It's hard to get a trainee to do that. And so this method was supposed to force them to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not a good way to teach someone to do that.
You're not actually teaching them,
You're
right?
not actually teaching them. And if you give them a script to read that's helping them overcome their anxiety, they're never going to overcome their anxiety. They're just going to have a script for the rest of
right? Like, duh, right? It feels kind of obvious now, right? Yeah.
it.
Yeah. That is true. Yeah, that's crazy. That's kind of crazy. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. It feels a little weird sometimes when you think about that, when you think about all these things. But I understand your points. I think it's actually fascinating when you think through that perspective. Um, that is kind of true, Yeah, yeah. I don't know. Do you have any piece of advice? Like, no, wait. I have one final question because I don't want to take up all of your Sunday time. But I got into a debate, like a debate, maybe that's a stretch, but I got into a conversation with a couple of people, and they were just like trying to make it like very clear that's their idea, that for you to be a psychoanalyst, it would be very important for you to have like a spot-free life, that your life was not that problematic, so that you could be able to understand like what's going on with other people's lives and all those things. And if you had like a problematic childhood or a problematic, I don't know, adolescence or something, that would be somehow detrimental to the job. That was going to be something crazy if you wanted to become an analyst. And I remember first, like going back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, like we were talking about Freud and the cocaine and all that stuff, and the young Freud, like this myth that is out there. And you think about all these guys, they were kind of really problematic individuals, even though they were doing something that was not really giving much of that up, would you agree with that? What's your take on that? Like, oh, you have, like, it's not really nice to have like a psychoanalyst who has been a real damaged individual in the past, or that had a lot of problems in the past, or something like that. You're supposed to be somebody that is a little bit more, in control, like, oh no, everything's okay. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I hope the people who said this to you weren't psychoanalysts. I mean, it is a, I mean, that's bananas, because it's a fantasy of every patient that their analyst is either spotless or now spotless, because it's some fantasy about yourself. So, I mean, I live with this. I mean, my partner was in analysis, and I think at some point he said to me, like, I thought that you were supposed to be like sane and even keeled. And I was like, where'd you get that idea? And he's like, I'm like, that's the silliest thing I've ever heard. But it's a fantasy, and I appreciate the fact that for a patient who's very vulnerable and putting themselves into the trust of the analyst, that they need that fantasy. So we are in a very funny position in terms of representing ourselves publicly, where you have to understand that the patient needs to believe that there's something solid in you. And indeed, the idea that you've been through an analysis means that you found some ground subjectively. But the idea that you had that to begin with, or should have it ultimately, is wrong. And I mean, just to give a little background, I'm working on analysts' experience of their analysis. There's an old book called Psychoanalysts Speak that has interviews with some very famous analysts, Hanna Siegel being one of them, Francis Tustin being another.
Oh, I haven't read that. Yeah.
And they speak about how sick they were. It's great. It's really beautiful. Francis Tustin in particular moved me because she was in a 16-year analysis with Bion that she says she doesn't remember at all. In the first 6 years of it, she thought he was a nuisance. And then she talks about how depressed her mother was, and how superficial her mother was, and how she must have been this kind of person, and she must have really drove him crazy because she really refused to investigate anything about herself. It's really beautiful because she went on to be one of the most important analysts of autistic children. And this experience she has of a wall that was impenetrable for 6 years, that he tried and tried and tried to break down little by little, it must have come from this analysis. And then interestingly, after 16 years, she said that she herself did not know why, but she just left her analysis out of nowhere. And he said something like, I don't think it's a good idea. And she was like, well, I'm leaving. And then she never came back after 16 years. And then she says that she fell into a complete kind of phobic symptom a year later. like new symptom where she couldn't go, like agoraphobia, couldn't go outside, which she then analyzed and worked on in herself to resolve it. And that was the first time that she felt that she used the analysis herself by herself, and that maybe she needed to do it without Bion. She also said that looking back on it, because he was about to leave for America, he did leave for America a few years after she ended, that maybe she already knew that he was leaving and she left in advance of his.
Right.
So, I mean, it's so beautiful because this is not the story of the spotless person or the person who has the ending and they're all cured and unsymptomatic, but someone who made huge contributions to the field and who clearly suffered enormously and could speak about it very powerfully.
And wouldn't shy away, right? From talking about it. Yeah. That's just great.
Yeah. She also says, and this is surprising, that Bion never once spoke to her about her past. She spoke about it, but he did not do it. He didn't make these kind of genetic interpretations of your mother, your father, whatever, which is incredible. And 16 years, I mean, it's real rigor.
What? What is the name of the book again, Jamieson?
Psychoanalysts Talk.
Psychoanalysts Talk. Okay. I got to read that one.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's really, really nice interviews.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's amazing. That sounds like a great story. Yeah. That goes against all that stuff I was asking you about, right? Yeah. Like, oh, maybe you got to be this one person and everything. I don't know. That sounds like baloney now. But, yeah, that's okay. That's pretty cool. That's good. That's good. That's amazing. Well, I would like to thank you so much for taking 1 hour and 16 minutes of your time on a Sunday to talk to me about, all those things. That's just great.
Thank you for bringing me back to the 90s. Actually, I think it's an important moment for the reinvention of analysis. Now that we talked about it, so
right,
there's more there to be said. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, thank you for taking the time, and I really appreciate it. Thank you for the picture. I think the conversation with my daughters was something like they got the book, the 50 Shrinks, and you're in the back cover.
Yeah.
That's such a great picture. Is that your office?
That was my first office. Yeah.
That was your first office. Okay. All right. And they were just like, is that the same woman from the thing? Is this like real? They were just kind of a little confused. The woman that is falling, it's funny because you're falling now. Yeah. You're forever falling. Yeah, it's kind of.
I'm forever mid-fall, which is
yeah. That's great. But thank you so much for that, and I really appreciate it. Okay.
Yeah. Let's talk about we'll go more in depth in the 90s in another
Yeah,
interview.
definitely. Let's do that. Let's psychoanalyze the 90s. That would be interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jamieson.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
No, it's the nostalgia for our children, right? The 90s, they're all completely nostalgic about the 90s because it's pre-internet. So.
Isn't that the thing? I think that's the thing, right? Yeah. That's still the rhetoric we're still using when we're talking about like you don't valorize your music enough, or you don't know what's like to, like have to go to Blockbuster and rent a movie, the stuff. Yeah, that's kind of crazy. And they're just like, what are you talking about? Like, no, I don't know what's that. But thank you so much. Thank you again. Okay, I'll talk to you. Bye-bye.
Right. Bye.
See you. Bye-bye.